Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Duncan. Ukraine update, day 218. The Kremlin has announced that Vladimir Putin will sign decree annexing 4 occupied regions in Ukraine tomorrow. The total area set to become de facto part of Russia amounts to about 15% of Ukraine and includes an estimate 4 million people. Following the signing ceremony in the Kremlin, Putin will give a major speech and will meet the Moscow appointed administrator of the Ukrainian regions, the Kremlin said. The Moscow's Red Square giant video screen have already been set up with billboards proclaiming Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said overnight, Ukraine will act to protect our people in Russia-occupied regions after what he described as an imitation of referendums. Ukraine's foreign minister said Kyiv and allies condemn such actions of Russia and consider them null and worthless. Zelensky's spokesperson, Sergei Nikiforov, said Ukraine's president has called an emergency meeting of security and defense officials for Friday. Sweden's Coast Guard earlier this week discovered a fourth gas leak on the damaged Nord Stream pipeline. A Coast Guard spokesperson told the Svenska Dagbladet, Sweden's Coast Guard earlier this week discovered a fourth gas leak on the damaged Nord Stream pipelines. A Coast Guard person told Svenska Dagbladet newspaper. Politicians across Europe have warned that the suspected sabotaging of the two Nord Stream pipelines could herald a new stage of hybrid warfare targeting vulnerable energy infrastructure in order to undermine support of Ukraine. Denmark's Foreign Minister, Jeppe Kofod, said that intentional explosions caused the leaks in the Nord Stream pipelines and that it was an unprecedented attack. NATO said leaks from the Nord Stream gas pipelines appeared to be deliberate acts of sabotage and vowed a united and determined response to any attack on their crucial infrastructure. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has proposed a fresh round of sanctions on Russia designed to make the Kremlin pay for escalating the conflict in Ukraine. Hungary will not support the EU's proposed new round of sanctions if they include energy sanctions, a government official has said. A report drawn up by an international working group on sanctions concluded Russia should now be declared a state sponsor of terrorism and had reached the legal definition of a terrorist state under US and Canadian law. Authorities in the Russia region of northern Ossetia, which borders Georgia, are reportedly putting in place travel restrictions to prevent people fleeing to Georgia to avoid conscriptions. SNP call Liz Truss clueless and out of touch. The SNP has said Liz Truss is completely out of touch with the people in Scotland as the Prime Minister failed to provide any reassurances on pensions and mortgages in her car crash local radio interviews and refused to reverse her disastrous budget. Responding, Ian Blackford, MP, said the Prime Minister must recall Parliament immediately and bring forward an emergency statement to reverse the damage she has caused, or step aside and give someone else a chance to do the right thing. Commenting, NSP Westminster leader Ian Blackford, MP, said the Tory government has taken a wrecking ball to the UK economy and put beyond doubt that independence is the only way to keep Scotland safe from the damage of Westminster control and get rid of the Tories for good. Liz Truss has shown she is reckless, clueless, and completely out of touch with the people in Scotland, who are increasingly worried about the impact of the disastrous Tory budget on their mortgage, pension, and household budget. If this teen-aunt Prime Minister refuses to act, then she should step aside and let someone else do the right thing before millions of people suffer. No one will feel reassured after the Prime Minister's crash radio interview this morning, and the longer she refuses to act, the more damage she will do. People of Scotland are getting very clear message from the UK government. Your homes, your pensions, your incomes are not safe under Westminster control. Independence is the only way to protect Scotland's economy and build a fairer future. Mark Carney accuses Truss government of undermining Bank of England. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has accused Liz Truss government of undercutting the country's economic institutions and working at cross purposes with the Bank of England. Carney's comments come after the bank was forced to step in with a £65 billion emergency bond buying program on Wednesday as part of efforts to quell a market meltdown, which risked draining pension funds of cash and leaving them at risk of insolvency. Sweeping tax cuts announced by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng last week have triggered investor panic over the future health of UK economy, prompting a sharp fall in the value of the pound and driving government borrowing costs high. Mr. Carney said, unfortunately, having a partial budget in these circumstances, tough global economy, tough financial market position, work at cross purposes with the bank has led to quite dramatic moves in financial markets. While he welcomes the government's aim of boosting economic growth, Mr. Carney said he was concerned about the lack of detail, independent scrutiny, and cooperation with other bodies like the Office of the Budget Responsibility, OBR. What's left out of the budget are the real measures that were going to drive the acceleration of growth. It's necessary for the numbers to add up, he said, adding, as he added, the message of financial markets is that there is a limit to unfunded spending and unfunded tax cuts in this environment. And the prices of those is much higher borrowing costs for the government and for the mortgage holders and borrowers up and down the country. At the same point, those higher costs of borrowing for everybody and does the positive impact of any tax reduction, said Mr. Carney, said as he pointed out that without other sources of funding, the government would probably have to cut spending elsewhere. The bank's massive intervention on Wednesday prompted comparisons to 1992's Black Wednesday, when the UK was ejected from the European exchange rate mechanism for failing to keep its exchange rate above its lower limit. The move appeared to have made some impact in calming the market turmoil, though the pound was still down about 1.1% against the dollar at £1.07 dollars. On Thursday morning, Mark Carney, who made the comments in an interview with BBC Radio 4's in today's program, led the Bank of England for 7 years until March 2020. Scott Government Emergency Budget Review. Members of an expert panel providing advice to the Scottish Government as part of its Emergency Budget Review, EBR, have been confirmed. Sir Anton Mascatelli, Professor Francis Rouane, and Professor Mike Brewer will assess the impact on Scotland of the UK's Chancellor's fiscal approach and held their first meeting with Deputy First Minister John Swinney today. Their advice will enable timely consideration of the implication of the UK government's fiscal event as work continues to prioritise the Scottish government's budget towards tackling the cost of living crisis. The Deputy First Minister has announced he will report the results of the EBR in the week beginning on 24th of October. Deputy First Minister John Swinney said the Scottish Government wants to make sure it gets the very best advice and fresh perspectives as ministers consider the complex and difficult decisions we face while tackling the challenges ahead. The radical shift in UK economic policy announced by Chancellor has already caused significant economic shock for the benefit of the people and businesses of Scotland, many of whom will find themselves paying higher prices. As a result, it is vital that we consider the current situation and potential solutions with care. The members of the panel all bring robust economic insights, and I am grateful to them for giving their time and expertise as we navigate these uncharted economic waters. Mini budget measures branded an attack on nature. Scotland's Environment Minister Mary McAllan and Biodiversity Minister Lorna Slater have written to the UK government urging them to drop the proposals announced in its mini budget, which they call an attack on nature and on the devolution settlement. The letter states that this proposal demonstrates a reckless attitude to legislation that has been developed over many decades and that enshrines vital protections for both nature and people. In the letter, Lorna Slater said that the measures viewed alongside the retained EU law revocation and reform bill represent an attack on nature and on the devolved settlement, despite the fact that the UK should be demonstrating global leadership in the lead up to the important COP15 Global Summit. Ms. Slater asked that the UK government drop these damaging proposals and instead work with the Scottish government and the other devolved governments to deliver high environmental standards that rise to the nature emergency and respect devolution. Ms. Slater added, "Your government has given little clarity over how the measures included in the mini budget will be taken forward, and what the implications of them will be for Scotland. More than 40% of mortgage withdrawn. More than 40% of available mortgages have been withdrawn from the market since the UK government announced its mini budget on Friday, figures show. Lenders have begun suspending products on Monday as they struggled to price them amidst the uncertainty on financial markets and the volatility. A number of offers being removed have snowballed this week. The latest data from Moneyfacts, which monitors the sector, revealed today that another 321 mortgages had been withdrawn overnight, taking the total to 1,621, with the 2,340 remaining on sale. During the previous 24-hour period, 935 packages were pulled, double the previous record of 462 at the start of the pandemic lockdowns. According to the financial research firm De facto, more than 20 providers have withdrawn their entire fixed rate mortgage range. Some of the biggest lenders said they would be revising their offers within days, while others prefer to wait until the financial market had calmed. HSBC, TSB, and Kent Reliance were amongst the lenders to have withdrawn products by Thursday, said Moneyfacts. First-time buyers have reported having their plans to buy a home wrecked by the escalating cost of mortgage finance. Homeowners with fixed-rate product, most of them lasting 2 years, say the cost of remortgaging has doubled the interest payments, adding more than £2,000 a year to the typical annual cost. The cost of mortgages soared on Monday after financial traders pushed up the cost of borrowing to UK institutions. Forecasts that the Bank of England's base rate is on course to rise to 6% from 0.25% only a year ago meant lenders needed to reprice their products, in some cases for the fifth of sixth time this year. Swap rates used to insure borrowing over a long period rose on Monday. The 2-year swap rate increased from 0.45% to above 5%, leading lenders to remove 2-year mortgage from their product range. Analysts expect the central bank to raise rates by at least 1% when they meet at the beginning of November, after the chief economist Peel said a significant increase was needed after an adverse reaction to tax cuts in the mini budget. Investors took fright after the chancellor said the cuts would need to be paid for by extra borrowing. There was also concern that Kwarteng's dash for growth would increase consumer demand at a time when the Bank of England was attempting to cool spending with higher interest rates. Economists calculate that the central bank would be forced to increase interest rates by more than previously expected, pushing up the cost of mortgage to interest rates to levels not seen since before the financial crash in 2008. £1.5 billion UK government funding for energy efficiency in homes in England. Around 130,000 low-income households across England could see bills slashed by around £400 to £700 a year as their homes receive energy efficiency upgrades through the government's latest help to heat funding. Up to up to 1.5 billion pounds is being made available through the Social Housing Carbonization Fund and Home Upgrade Grant schemes, allowing social housing providers and local authorities to submit bids for funding to upgrade the properties of around 130,000 low-income and social housing households. Today's funding will see the installations of measures such as external wall and loft installation, energy efficient doors and windows, heating pumps, and solar panels, with multiple measures often being installed in a single home to considerably improve the energy performance. Local authorities and social housing providers will be able to submit bids for funding and will deliver upgrade from early next year until March 2025, building on more than 30,000 homes already being upgraded under the Social Housing Decarbonization Fund and Home Upgrade Grant Scheme. This help will be worth £1 billion over the next 3 years, starting from April 2023. Support will be targeted at those most vulnerable, but will also be available for the least efficient homes in lower council tax bonds. It is still to be confirmed whether this will result in additional funding to the Scottish Government via Bennett consequentials. Trades union vote to accept local government pay offer. Unison and Unite members have accepted the local government pay deal proposed by COSLA, which will give the lowest paid staff a 10% pay rise. The deal, which was finalised in partnership with the Scottish Government, will see all staff receiving a rise of at least £1,900, with targeted support for those on the lowest income. The Scottish Government provided £140 million on a recurring basis to support the pay award and also provide a further £120.6 million in additional capital in each year of the next 2 financial years. Recurring equivalent funding will be incorporated into the local government general revenue grant from 2024 and 2025, commenting, the Deputy First Minister John Swinney said. I am very pleased that the trade union members have accepted this pay offer, which will deliver a substantial pay rise for local government workers in key roles across Scotland. We have worked collaboratively and held detailed discussions with COSLA and trade union to get to this point. We are doing everything possible within the resources available to support people of Scotland in the face of the cost of living crisis. Hurricane Ian leaves more than 2 million without power as Florida hit with catastrophic wind and rain. Hurricane Ian, one of the most powerful storms ever to strike the U.S. mainland, has battered southwest Florida with high winds, rain, and storm surges as it weakened and moved inland. More than 2 million homes and businesses were left without power as the storm swept ashore in southwest Florida on Wednesday afternoon, bringing catastrophic 100 mph winds and a deadly storm surge of up to 18 feet. Hours later, the storm, estimated to be around 140 miles wide, was downgraded from a Category 4 to a Category 1 storm as it moved slowly northeast causing major floods. The true scale of the damage remained unclear as darkness fell with power and communications network down and emergency services workers forced to take shelter from the worst of the storm. Residential areas in Fort Myers Beach and several other coastal cities were almost completely submerged. Buildings were damaged and trees and power lines brought down. The utility company, Florida Power and Light, warned those in Ian's path to brace for days without power. In coastal Florida, desperate people posted to Facebook and other social sites pleading for rescue for themselves or loved ones. A local sheriff's office reported that it was getting many calls from people trapped in flooded homes. Millions of Florida residents remain directly in the crosshairs of the storm, which was expected to remain a powerful hurricane with gusts well above 100 miles per hour as it continued on a path northeast towards Orlando and the Atlantic coast on Thursday. The storm surge flooded the lower level emergency room of the HCA Florida Fawcett Hospital in Port Charlotte, while fierce winds tore part of the fourth floor roof from its intensive care unit, according to Dr. Baggett Bodine, who works there. Intensive care staff were forced to evacuate the hospital's sickest patients, some of them on ventilators, to the other floors. The medium-sized hospital spanned 4 floors, but patients were forced into just 2 because of the damage. Ian had already been blamed for several deaths and unprecedented flooding in Cuba, which was beginning to restore electricity to regions on Wednesday after a total wipeout of power on the island. Meanwhile, a search for more than 20 people was underway off the coast of Florida after a boat carrying migrants from Cuba to the U.S. mainland sank. Several passengers were rescued from the waters. President Biden promised the full support of federal resources for search and rescue mission, and then the recovery effort in Florida, which officials warned would be changed forever by the impact of the storm. Hundreds of jobs to go as BBC announces World Service cutbacks. The BBC has announced deep cuts to its World Service output that will result in loss of hundreds of jobs, saying it has been forced to act by the government's ongoing license fee freeze. In a move that could weaken the UK's soft power around the world, the corporation will stop producing radio output in 10 languages, including Chinese, Hindi, and Arabic. BBC Persian will end its audio broadcasting aimed at Iran, with the announcement coming at a time when widespread protests are taking place in the country. There will also be a change in focus of the World Service's English language radio output, with more time dedicated to live news and sports programming at the expense of standalone programs. About 382 jobs will be lost as a result of the proposals, which the BBC said was required to make £28.5 million of annual savings. The broadcaster blamed years of below-inflation license fee freezes imposed by the government, in addition to the rapidly increasing cost of producing programs because of the state of the economy. The World Service was traditionally funded directly by the government and was seen as a soft power tool that provided news and information from the UK to hundreds of millions of people around the globe. This money largely dried up as part of George Osborne's austerity measures in 2010, when the bill for the World Service operations was loaded on the domestic license fee payers. There will be a net loss of 226 jobs in the UK and 156 overseas. Despite the funding cuts, the BBC claims the World Service still reaches a weekly audience of about 364 million people. Man found guilty of murdering Reen and Andrew McRae in 1976. An 80-year-old man has been found guilty of the murder of Renee and Andrew McRae in the Highlands in 1976. William McDowell was convicted following a trial at the High Court in Inverness today. Renee, 36, and her 3-year-old son, Andrew, left their home in Inverness on November 12, 1976, heading south on the A9. Their BMW car was discovered on fire in a lay-by near Dalmagary later that evening. Neither Renee nor Andrew have been seen since, and their bodies have never been found. The investigation into the disappearance of Renee and Andrew McRae has been one of Scotland's longest running and enduring cases, and has been subject to an ongoing police investigation since the event of November 1976. Lately, it was subject to an intensive review led by detectives from Police Scotland's major investigation teams, which initially commenced in 2017 and reinvestigation started in 2018. This review and reinvestigation involved assessing all the available materials gathered over more than 4 decades, reviewing previous witnesses' statements, and where possible, re-interviewing people who had given information about the case. All modern investigative techniques were considered and applied where appropriate. The inquiry also involved a major operation in 2019 to drain and forensically search Lena Quarry near Inverness for evidence. This involved removing more than 100,000 tons of material, with more than 5,000 tons subject to a thorough search by scientist officers over a 5-month period. Even though no evidence was found at Lena Quarry, this was a significant line of inquiry which had to be exhausted. William McDowell was ultimately arrested in September 2019 after an extensive review and reinvestigation carried out by detectives from Police Scotland's major investigation team and local officers building on decades of extensive inquiries into disappearance of Renee and Andrew McRae carried out since 1976. Well, that is it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff and to make more programs. Good night, and thank you for watching.